For those who don't know, my name's Jonathan Michie. I'm president of Kellogg College, and it's a huge delight and privilege for me to be able to be talking this evening with a Kellogg Fellow, Professor Geraldine Van Bueren QC. I'll be throwing it open to you to ask your questions of Geraldine. So when you do, if you obviously switch on your microphone, and if you want to switch on your camera as well, so that Geraldine can see you when you're asking a question, that'd be great. But in the meantime, if you can all keep your cameras and microphones off to limit the distraction, that would be great. So many of you will know Professor Geraldine Van Bueren already, because she's been a very active and supportive member of Kellogg College for a long time now, I think more than 15 years. Those who don't, Professor Geraldine Van Bueren is a leading international human rights law academic, practitioner, lobbyer. She's a QC. She's got many strings to her bow, and I'll ask her about one or two of those in a moment. So I'll start off though, Geraldine, if I may, by saying I've been hugely impressed, as I'm sure all members of the Kellogg community, with the work you've done so effectively and consistently over the years to defend and promote human rights for many sectors of society across the globe. So can I ask, by asking very general but rather obvious question as to how you came about this passion and line of work? What sort of first attracted you to the idea of promoting human rights, and then what drove you to do everything you've done to promote and advocate human rights? Really, what's been your journey?
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Jonathan, for inviting me. And I wish we were all together face to face in the room so that I could see you. I wanted to really to be a human rights lawyer. I was one of those precocious ones. And from the age of 11, I had read a novel, actually, although it's really a documentary, called Babi Yar by Alexander Kuznetsov. And in it, he describes what happened in 1941 in Ukraine, when 33,000 Jews were herded towards Babi Yar and killed. And in the flyleaf, it mentioned that these were part of the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust, of which I didn't know anything, because traumatized people don't really, and then didn't, discuss it. So that was when I decided I really didn't want any other family to suffer the loss that mine had. And I wanted to work in human rights to try and prevent it. My early childhood, actually, I lived with my grandparents, my mother's brother, as well as my parents. And my grandparents were refugees. Everybody who came to the house was a refugee. So I lived and breathed that atmosphere. And I also saw the resilience of people. My grandmother, as a baby, started out being carried from the Polish-Lithuanian border and then walked all the way to the English Channel. How my great-grandparents, who died before I was born, but how my great-grandparents managed 13 children walking across is quite extraordinary. And it's very sad that people are facing the same decisions now, showing the same resilience, the same innovation, and really requiring support. I learned lateral thinking, I should just say, from my grandfather, who was crossing over, trying to escape from Tsarist Russia into Poland. And a lot of borders now, as then, were swept, sand, and therefore you could see the footsteps in the sand, and they sent dogs afterwards. And my grandfather realized, actually, well, if you walked backwards, it would look like someone was escaping from Poland into Tsarist Russia. And that's what he did, yes, and then to Genoa.
Yeah, and unlikely story, but it worked.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, no, well, I didn't know that. That's great. Well, it must be all the more frustrating for you then to see the way much of the politicians and media across the world treat refugees at the moment as if it's a sort of criminal act being a refugee, rather than a pretty fundamental human right that you should have the right to asylum if you're forced to flee in that way.
Yes, and how countries actually benefit, you know, from refugees and asylum seekers, because they've had to show such resilience and innovation and sheer bravery crossing the seas to get to the asylum country.
Yeah, I find it's particularly ironic with Donald Trump's sort of anti-immigrant rhetoric, thinking, what have immigrants ever done for America?
Yes.
But of course, it's true of all countries.
Yeah.
Yes, as you say, it's a shame that that this discussion is virtual. But I should reassure the audience that well, Professor Geraldine Van Bueren was due to come to Kellogg College and do this in person this time last year before the first lockdown, and so immediately we had to postpone it. But we have still got it in the diary for this time next year once everyone's double vaccinated and had their boosters, etc. So this event is just a taster for that. So if you don't have time to get your question in today, then keep it for this time next year when you can talk with Geraldine after the talk over champagne on the lawn and then over college formal dinner. I should say, Geraldine, I feel slightly intimidated interviewing you because the last interview I saw with you was done by Angelina Jolie. Could you tell us how that came about, how you came to be interviewed by Angelina Jolie?
Well, I've had the privilege of working with Amnesty International for a long time and helped draft a children's rights treaty, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which remains the world's most widely ratified human rights treaty, every country except the United States. And Angelina and Amnesty wanted to do a book on children's rights for children and invited me to participate. And Angelina has this extraordinary in-depth expertise on trauma, refugee trauma, and also knowledge in terms of violence against women and children. So very much a complementary expertise. And we have actually, I could show you, it's, I just received this, it's an advanced copy. It's not going to be on sale, everything goes to Amnesty International, but it's called Know Your Rights and Claim Them. And it's for children, teenagers. And it's based on tales of children who've actually already implemented their rights, from a boy in India who went to school, but then the rest of his village couldn't afford to go to school. So at the end of the day, he would teach under the tree all the village children, to Brazilian street children, the most vulnerable, campaigning, carrying placards saying we don't want to be a social problem, and contributing to changes in the Brazilian constitution protecting children's rights. And we had an editorial board of children to tell us what they wanted, and children drawn from all over the globe. We're going to be producing a pocket version as well. The idea is to reach also to the most vulnerable, including children who are illiterate. So we have illustrations, and we've worked with cartoonists and illustrators. And it's been a wonderful process, actually. And it's been a great privilege to work both for Amnesty and with Angelina.
Great. And sorry, who did you say produced the book?
It's for Amnesty International. It's Anderson Press, and it will be available from September.
Oh, excellent. Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks very much.
With all royalties and everything going to Amnesty, I should say.
Great. No, we'll certainly promote that. Thank you. Now, another area you're active in is being chair of the Association of Working Class Academics, and you wrote a fascinating article in the Times Higher Educational Supplement about that recently. Can you say something about it? I mean, obviously you regard class as still being important as well as other matters, but can you say something about that? How that came about? What the sort of aimed objectives are?
Yes, I mean, what actually, I'd always been very private about my own background, which is a working class background, or heritage, as we like to say, because I think it could develop, it has a lot of positive attributes. A student came to see me one day and started to tell me all about the tension between her wanting to be a lawyer and members of the community saying that she was betraying her class and betraying her family. And I, without thinking, just said, I know what you feel like. And she leapt out of the chair. She must have been under such stress and said, how dare you? How could you possibly know this? And I explained that I came from a working class background. And after that, I got sort of shy knocks on the door from other working class students. And then I wrote a piece many years ago, actually, about what it was like to be a working class academic. And normally when you write anything for the press, you get letters saying, I agree, I disagree, being published in that particular media. But there was nothing, but my inbox had many emails saying confidential and people telling me their own personal stories. So I thought there was a need for some kind of supportive organization. And then I'd read actually in The Guardian, an American academic saying that he found it harder to come out as a working class academic than to come out as gay. And I think that really illustrates the pressures many people are under about being open about what is an important part of their identity. So I asked people quite senior actually whether they wished to join, and they didn't wish. They wished to, remain private, and I respect that. But a group of younger academics were very interested. And we set up this association. It's become international, actually. I wasn't anticipating that. And we have members from, Canada, the United States, Australia, all over. We have about 2,000 Twitter followers. We thought we'd set it up to support working class academics, and working class covers covers all races, religions, sex, gender. It's a unifying factor of all the protected characteristics. And we're drafting at the moment a code which we want to present to universities about how they could be more supportive to working class academics. We are new. If anybody's interested in joining, then we do have a website. We haven't funding at the moment, but we wanted to launch this. We've been given support to postgraduate students who find it very difficult attending conferences. COVID has made it easier in one sense, because COVID has become, tragically, in terms of Zoom, it's an equalizer so that people can attend conferences without having to pay. And that's made research easier, but for the most tragic of reasons. Yes, there are a number of issues. And so, if anybody's interested in joining, then please do. And please have a look at our website.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the international aspect. I mean, how do you think this does vary across countries?
There's certainly different terminology. In India, you have obviously caste. There's a decision from the Indian Supreme Court that talks about caste being a form of social origin. And indeed, class discrimination is prohibited in the Indian constitution in terms that the language from the 1940s talks about the backward classes, but the intention is very much a good intention. Cyprus prohibits class discrimination. South Africa recently looked at class discrimination in a very intersectional way. So this is much more international than people realize. We tend to talk about it being an English problem, but it isn't. It's much more common.
Yeah. And how would you say that relates to the issue of social mobility? Well,
social mobility, firstly, isn't enshrined in law. And there are some wonderful initiatives from schools, from universities, from business, trying to make people who wish to be more mobile. But no way can charities or universities cover the entire country. It requires a lot more. Class discrimination benefits, if there was a prohibition, everybody. Firstly, it's not just working class discrimination, it's all. So name calling, bog standard, comprehensive, chavs, toffs, right along the line. And it would cover those who don't wish to be, are very happy in their own class, don't wish to be mobile. And it would ensure dignity for them as well. So it's broader.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Now, I know you're currently working on a bill, I think I'm right in saying, on socioeconomic rights, which is clearly related.
Yes, I mean, there was a group of us, a small group of academics and people from NGOs who set out to draft a Socioeconomic Rights Act to protect rights such as rights to the highest attainable standard of health, adequate housing, food. These were much needed pre-COVID, which is where we started. And now during COVID, I think the inequalities has shown that there's quite a resistance to that, across political parties, really, to making these rights part of the law. Human rights is actually divided into 5. You have civil and political rights, freedom of expression, privacy, religion, absolutely essential. But equally essential are the other rights, the socioeconomic rights. And it's rather strange because in England, we have had those rights protected in the medieval period. So some people, or indeed many people, do not know that Magna Carta actually had a sister called Carta de Forester. And this had these nascent rights. Rights to honey, which may seem, well, why on earth would you want a right to honey? It seems quite trivial, really. But in medieval times, it was an essential food instead of sugar and a source of energy. A right to wood, well, both equal now to a right to adequate housing, right to shelter, and rights to energy. And hunting rights and foraging rights, right to food. So we had those rights and we've forgotten about them.
Yeah, I mean, your point about COVID is well, tragically very true. If you look at the death figures and sort of correlation with socioeconomic status and the state of housing and people being cramped into housing where it's clearly impossible to socially distance, multi-generation families, and then people, most of whom in those households then going out to work in the frontline jobs and coming back and so on. So it's certainly highlighted, and you'd hope that something would then be done about it.
Well, I think what's happened is a change of image. Some people would describe it as poverty porn, the showing of poorer families, people living on benefits. And now you've had this realization, that the people depend on people who are actually directly providing these services, working with their hands, things which were really undervalued. So I think this is actually a key constitutional moment, which we should realize to achieve this change, because I think that would be quite widely supported. The government currently has a levelling up agenda. Well, another way of levelling up is to prohibit all forms of discrimination that obstruct that. It was very interesting that the Runnymede Trust gave evidence to the Parliamentary Education Committee. And for those of you who don't know, the Runnymede Trust is a trust which was established to achieve racial equality and to prevent and prohibit racial discrimination. And they said, in relation to children falling behind at schools pre-COVID, that it was really an issue of class, and it wasn't a question of Black and minority ethnic school children and white school children. It was very much a unifying factor. And class does transcend all the prohibited discriminations currently prevented in the Equality Act. So I think the tools are there if we want to seize them.
Right. Now, I know that you've just been awarded a highly prestigious Lieberhume Fellowship, so congratulations on that, because I know how competitive they are. Can you tell us something about that? What you plan to use the period of the fellowship for?
I'm going to be writing a book. I received a book contract on class and law, and including social mobility, and looking at class globally, regionally, and also nationally, asking questions, is class still important? Which I think it is. If you look at the World Health Organization study on Glasgow, the wealthiest neighbours cheek by jowl with the poorest boroughs, and a difference of 10 years life expectancy. And I think, so it even affects as fundamental a right as the right to life. And if we look at Grenfell Tower, because Grenfell Tower is a completely avoidable tragedy, because of the actions of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, I think actually the UK is liable under the European Convention on Human Rights for breach of the right to life. But if those individuals had been exactly the same makeup in terms of refugee asylum status, ethnic minority status, older children, people living with disabilities, but you changed their wealth aspect, then I think Kensington Borough of Chelsea would have paid more attention to the concerns that were raised. And Bourdieu has written about this lack of cultural, economic and social capital. And I think we saw that being played out at Grenfell Tower. And I also, there's a wonderful scheme at the University of Law, which have established a We Belong club for people of a wide range of backgrounds who traditionally didn't enter the legal professions. And one woman told me, it's about a couple of months ago, they invite speakers from similar backgrounds. So we have the opportunity and the privilege of trying to support and work with them. And one woman said to me that she'd achieved an interview at a very good firm of solicitors, was told her legal qualifications were fine, good grasp of the law, but was told, and I quote, there was too great a social background between her and the solicitors at the firm. Now, no firm of solicitors would ever even contemplate saying that in relation to race, gender, sex, religion, but they felt perfectly free to do that in relation to class. And they were right, it was lawful. So class is still important, it's still impeding people, and it is something that could be very easily overcome.
Yeah, no, that's extraordinary. I must admit, I didn't know that. So the fellowship, you're going to be really pursuing, well, the agendas you've just been talking about, and also will you be doing more work on what actually might be done about it in practical terms?
Yes, I'm looking at, how you change the law in different countries, and I'll be looking at, and I haven't started this, so I can't give you any answers about possibilities of affirmative action and quotas. So things that have been used in other countries in relation to a range of groups. I'll be looking to see how under Human Rights Act, the European Convention on Human Rights, can class being included? I think the answer to that is yes. There is a reference to prohibition of discrimination on the basis of birth, property, social origin, or any other status. So that hasn't happened, but I think there's space for that to happen. So I'll be looking at that, and I'll also be looking at the treatment of class throughout history as well.
Great, excellent, good. Thank you very much. Well, I should let others get a chance to ask their questions. And one of our attendees, Dr. Alison Taysom, who actually kindly just put in the chat box the link through to Know Your Rights and Claim Them. And sorry, Geraldine, I hadn't quite picked up when you're talking about that being published by Amnesty International. It was actually written by you and Angelina Jolie pulled together. So thank you, Alison, for posting the details there. And Alison, I think you've got a question you wanted to ask.
Oh, thank you. I really admire your work and everything that you're doing and the important book you're going to write. I think the key thing I have is 3 questions. So the first one is, can the Association of Working Class Academics commission a study to produce data of how many full professors with working class backgrounds are in post out of the total population of full professors, so that we can start to benchmark the growth there? And then second, can this data be used to benchmark and key performance indicate the achievement of proportional representation of full professors from working class backgrounds? And third, what sort of support can we give the cultural straddlers who have an awareness of working class culture and an awareness of other cultures who are potential and powerful advocates for social mobility, and how they can create knowledge for empowering that kind of social mobility, and how this data can be mobilized to systematically measure the narrowing of achievement gaps based on poverty, class, race, gender, special educational needs, and all the protected characteristics of the Equality Act. Thank you.
Alison, those are 3 excellent questions. Thank you very much. And I think it's a very good suggestion. I think we should try and commission a study looking at academics' background. It's quite difficult to do because you need people to volunteer. The universities can compile statistics based on the Equality Act, but because, as you rightly said, there's this omission of class in the Equality Act, it has to be voluntary, which is one of the reasons why I think there should be a change in the law. But I certainly think we should try it. So I thank you for that, and I will take that back to the association. And I also think it'd be very helpful, obviously, as you point out, to benchmark and to measure the progress. You importantly raised the cultural issue. I mean, one of the things we want in this code is what we call a democracy of knowledge. And that is, there are many important writers, scholars who come from working class and poorer backgrounds, and nobody knows about them. And we can learn a lot from Black Lives Matter because they've been unearthing history. And for example, in law, we teach John Locke, who was actually a slave trader, benefited from the Royal African Society in a major way, even though he wrote against slavery. But we rarely teach Tom Paine, who wrote what was a bestseller, actually, of The Rights of Man. It outsold Edmund Burke at the time. And he costed, a lot of these rights, education. He even advocated child benefit. We're talking about the 18th century, a pension, extraordinary work, yet we don't teach it. And if we ignore all this kind of knowledge, it looks like we're proposing something radical and new, and it isn't. What we're doing is unearthing a history and a culture that has been undervalued and ought to be placed on an equal footing for the benefit of the entire academic community.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that okay for now, Alison?
Yes, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Good. And Graham Lee wants to ask a question.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Professor Van Bueren, as well. My question is quite broadly about the position of the sort of Gypsy, Traveller and Roma community in Britain and in Europe. On the one hand, in higher education, they have there's a recent pledge to increase representation amongst this community in higher education, which I think was launched at Bucks New University, and the government's sort of levelling up agenda doesn't appear to sort of address this group at all. And in fact, like the police crime sentencing courts bill could be seen to prejudicially disadvantage the sort of traveller way of life. So there's a lot of places in which this group of people kind of intersect with your themes on class and social mobility and on access to fundamental rights in British society. I just wanted to sort of ask what your views on that and your sort of trends and directions are. Thank you.
No, I think that's. I'm really glad you raised that, Graham. I think it's very important. I mean, the prejudice that existed, including during the Holocaust. I mean, Gypsies, Travellers, Roma were targeted and in concentration camps as well. And it still persists in Eastern Europe. There are a number of human rights cases specifically focusing on education, poorer quality of education, segregated in education in parts of Eastern and Central Europe. In this country, I mean, firstly, I would welcome, and I don't know the background of all those who follow us and who I hope will become members, to join the Association of Working Class Academics, because we involve students as well. And you're right, I mean, absolutely intersectional approach. And I think a lot more needs to be done in higher education, and to be making universities and further education, more welcoming. I'm delighted by the initiative that you mentioned, but it really should be universities UK-wide to involve and to find ways of supporting and involving the community. There's a college in Texas which they've really sort of changed the model, and they've been looking at working with the community, showing how a university can be a benefit to the local community, sort of expanding the idea of village and taking people from a wide range of backgrounds, including those who don't have a house, but they do have homes, so I think there's a lot of potential there, and I think it's something we should be looking at further. And I would recommend that you and others approach Universities UK or approach us and see if we can together work on this, because we'd be very glad to lend our support.
Thank you. Thanks.
Great. Any other questions? If anyone's got a question, either put your electronic hand up or put something in the chat. But in the meantime, Geraldine, when you mentioned the Holocaust, I was going to ask you what you thought of the sort of history since then, and the current seeming rise globally of demagogues in power, across the globe in a number of different forms, and seeming rise of anti-Semitism in a number of countries. I mean, it's obviously a big issue, big question, but I mean, international human rights as a concept and international human rights law, I think did help make progress after 1945, after the Holocaust. I mean, do you see that as really still central to trying to have a sort of counter effective against the sort of current seeming rise of demagoguery and racism in a number of forms, but including anti-Semitism?
Well, I think it has the potential, but it needs to be incorporated in national states, because what it does is enable people, if you have the full panoply of rights, people have adequate housing, food, they feel part of the state. It builds up a trust, the spirit level. Wilkinson spoke about and researched extensively that in countries where there was more equality, there was more democracy and there was more trust and faith in the state and state systems. We saw what happened with Trump, and although I wouldn't, obviously support or approve of any way of that approach, it was understandable why people feel attracted, and you had people being denigrated in the Hillary Clinton talked about the despicables. And that really isn't helpful. I think we need to speak in language that respects equality and dignity, and people struggling and having less is not a reason for contempt, and we deserve more from the politicians. And the human rights does create the system to hold people for account, and it's expanding all the time, including in issues of climate change and sustainability. And there could be arguments made in relation to vaccine access now, in relation to COVID. There are the means. Everybody has this right to the highest attainable standard of health and life, and there are duties on the states to support each other, to help provide the vaccine, not on a sort of pick and mix basis, but universally.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial point about how you sort of bring people with you and make them feel sort of included, rather than sort of push them away, which can be politically sort of disastrous. And I think there's a lot of echoes in a lot of what you've been saying in the Centenary Commission on Adult Education that Kellogg sponsored, which was so called because it was published 100 years after the 1919 report on adult education after the First World War. And looking back, this sort of echoes with some of my questions. It seems amazingly far-sighted in 1919 compared to what's often quite limited view of politicians and practitioners today, because that commission said that came out of the Ministry for Reconstruction about what on earth you do after, to rebuild after such a disaster like the First World War. But it was much broader than just saying you have to rebuild the economy and educate people with skills. Talked about communities and democracy needing an educated population who could discuss things in an inclusive manner, and be able to sort of weigh up evidence and consider political arguments in order to be able to tell demagogues from genuine political arguments.
One of the great attractions of Kellogg, and indeed I would say this anyway, not just because we're in conversation, but to your presidency of the college, is this commitment to lifelong education, which I think post-COVID is going to become even more with a sort of fragility, and also people moving from post to post and job to job, and having the ability to learn new skills.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and having a sort of expansive view of it, of allowing individuals and communities to say what they want to learn about, rather than just having government telling them what's good for them.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I taught for a period at the Working Men's College in London, and one of the courses was sociology of law. But students needed more than sociology of law if they wanted to, enter the legal profession, and there needs to be, support for those skills bit by bit, and other things which just enhance your life. I play the flamenco guitar, and I learned this rather late in life, it's just a joy actually, and so lifelong education is absolutely essential.
Great. Now, Cecilia Muldoon has written the chat. Cecilia, do you want to switch on your microphone to ask your question, and your camera if you so wish?
Hi, thank you, Geraldine, for a great presentation. Just to say to everyone, I've actually joined the Working Class Academics, and I'm presenting at the conference this year, so the first presentation ever, because it is such a supportive group. But my question, Geraldine, I don't know if this is your area of expertise, if you like, but I'm interested in the welfare system in this country and the rise in the number of households subject to the benefit cap since people have been furloughed or lost work because of COVID. I mean, I think pre-COVID, those subject to the benefit cap were seen as the undeserving poor. They weren't earning enough, weren't working enough hours, etc. But since COVID and the rise in the number of people who have lost their jobs, there's obviously more and more households subject to the benefit cap. And of course, now with social and private renters and evictions. So is there some form of legal argument or perhaps challenge that an increasing number of households aren't having their sort of basic human rights met by the benefit cap and the way it's used?
Well, there are, I mean, it's a very good question, Cecilia, thank you. I mean, there are legal challenges that you can make under what's called Article 3, for example, of the Human Rights Act, which prohibits torture, obviously not, but degrading treatment. But you really don't want people to have to be at that level of degradation to live a decent life. And one of the reasons why I'm part of this group drafting this socioeconomic rights bill is to provide adequate housing, access, food, and increasing the number of people both working and not working using food banks. I mean, food banks were never intended to be permanent in this country. And you have marvelous work done by a range of religious organizations, including the Trestle Trust and neighborhood communities, but they shouldn't, be there instead of a right to food. At Queen Mary's, we held, because it's based in Tower Hamlets, which is one of the poorest, you may know, areas of London. Sorry, I don't know which part of the country you live in, but so we invited food bank users to come along and provided hot meals, and staff were terribly supportive. And we asked them, which rights are the most important, and actually they said right to food to them was the most important. And then one person said, well, to who else have you spoken to? And we said, well, actually, you're the first. And they said, well, we're food bank users and nobody comes to us first about, food issues. So we need to, work with people who are recipients of a range of benefits and welfare. I mean, the United Nations has said the welfare state is good, but by itself it is not sufficient. So it's been very critical of the United Kingdom, because we also don't have, as well as the welfare state, these socioeconomic rights that go back to England and the medieval period. Scotland is planning to introduce legislation which would incorporate these rights into Scottish law. And they also have they've introduced a bill to incorporate the Children's Rights Convention into Scottish law, which includes rights of food, water, clothing, adequate standard of living. But there's actually been a challenge for other reasons by the UK government. And I think the approach would have been better had the UK government implemented UK-wide these rights, and perhaps if it needs to start somewhere with children.
Thank you, Geraldine. That was really interesting.
Pleasure. Good luck with your presentation.
Great. Actually, Geraldine, there's a completely different topic I wanted to ask you about, if there was time, which is a couple of days ago, I think it was, I saw in the newspaper report, which is really interesting, of a court case where Shell, the major global oil producer, actually lost a court case which people had brought, I think it was in the Netherlands, saying that their human rights to carry on sort of life on Earth were being impinged by Shell as an oil company continuing to explore to find new oil fields to do acts which would potentially threaten the environment and life on Earth, and actually impinges very much on international human rights in terms of the things we've been talking about, refugees and what's likely to happen with serious climate change, of people being displaced and so on. So my question sort of, do you think that there's a role for international human rights law in terms of climate change and trying to progress that agenda? Because I must admit, I hadn't really thought of it until I saw that news story.
Yes, no, and in fact, a group of children from around the world, including the United States, Australia, some of the islands, the Maldives, have brought a complaint to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and they've been arguing that their rights to a future have been denied. There was a case in the Philippines, actually, some time ago, where children brought an action on behalf of themselves and future generations because of the deforestation from the logging and the poverty that comes with that deforestation. And they were told that they were entitled to bring that case. In Australia, children have recently, again, young people have brought a case. And although the decision didn't go their way, it didn't completely foreclose. And I'm saying that quite generally because I haven't had a chance yet to read the case. So children actually are really, taking this issue really seriously and developing international human rights law in a direction that it ought to be going, and sometimes succeeding.
Yeah, no, well, we'll watch this space, but yeah, no, that's potentially, hugely significant. Well, if there's no other questions, then as I say, Geraldine's kindly agreed to come back to Kellogg once conditions permit, probably this time next year, where we'll have a chance to actually, you have a chance to talk to her in person and ask questions both during the session and afterwards. But in the meantime, Geraldine, thank you very much indeed for having taken the time. We look forward to the publicising your Know Your Rights and Claim Them publication once that's out in this country, and look forward to welcoming you back to Kellogg in this time next year. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much everyone for joining us, and I hope you can join us again this time next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions.
And actually, Geraldine, I should just say before we close it, is there anything, final comments you wanted to make before we close?
No, I thank you. Just thank you very much for inviting me. And I would just like to say that hopefully we'll be in a post-COVID world, and that COVID won't even be an endemic, but can be rid of through vaccines equitably shared and distributed.
Yep, absolutely. Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Geraldine, and thank you very much, everyone, and see you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Stay well.